This recipe was produced at the request of a few loyal viewers. However, I want to make it clear that this traditional dish from the Netherlands has a peculiar flavor that's not immediately accessible to everyone. You can think of it as a combination of gingerbread and beef, because that's basically what it is. The biggest obstacle to this recipe was the special pepper cake, as it's called, which is not available outside of a few small regions of Europe and is difficult to make. It has to melt into the dish, which doesn't happen with other breads. I solved this by making a dough part of the dish and having it bake in a pressure cooker along with the meat at the same time.
Have the spices assembled. You have half a teaspoon of nutmeg, about 4 cardamom pods, about 6 whole cloves, half a teaspoon of black peppercorns, half a teaspoon of cinnamon, about a quarter of a teaspoon of coriander seeds, and about half a teaspoon of ground ginger. These are all going to get ground up in an electric spice mill. Then we begin toasting the flour over medium-high heat. I have it on 7 out of 1 to 10. Just keep watching it as it cooks. You'll see the color will change. After about 5 minutes, you'll notice a strong aroma begins to develop. The temperature is increasing and the water's mostly been driven off. Now I'm going to lower the heat down to 5. Give it a couple more minutes here. And around this point, you'll notice that the flour begins to actually turn brown. You probably can't see it with the color resolution of this camera, but the flour actually begins to turn brown as soon as you stop stirring it for a minute or so. So I'm putting the spices in here. The same ones I showed you earlier, just passed through the electric spice mill. Going to rub these through. Get rid of any of the large particles, which is mostly the pods from the cardamom and the shells from the husks from the peppercorns and that sort of stuff. We don't need those in there. We got plenty of spice here. Okay, get rid of all these solids. That's okay. Now here's where they get toasted along with the flour. Now I'm turning the heat off. Flour was toasted for about 5 or 6 minutes, added the spices, heat's off. Now we're going to mix this together and the spices will be toasted in the flour. After about 1 minute of this, get the pan off the heat completely. In fact, this is just about long enough now. The spices are going to toast real fast because they're finely ground powder. Okay, this is fine. Get it off the heat. In a bowl here I have 45 grams of honey, 30 grams of dark brown muscovado sugar. I'm adding very hot water to this, and we're just going to stir this around to dissolve this. Now I have a second bowl here with the toasted rye flour and the spices, and I'm going to add in this mixture with the sugar and the honey, and we work this together to make a dough. And when you've got a soft, kneadable kind of dough formed, it's still warm of course, just set it off to the side. You can leave it at room temperature. In fact, don't refrigerate it because it'll be harder to work with later. Now we assemble the ingredients. I got 120 grams of onion that's been coarsely chopped, 2 tablespoons of cocoa powder, unsweetened cocoa powder. It's about 10 grams. I've got the meat here, which was 1 thick slab that I just cut along the middle to divide it into 2 halves, and then I also removed any tendons that were in there. And the beer, I'm using Eggenberg's Erbach beer, and this is very nice because it has some very buttery notes in it, and it's a double bock, so it won't be so bitter as to cause bitterness in the final dish after it reduces. You can use any dark beer. This one's going to work really well. Hey, 25 grams of butter melted in there, foamed up. Now I'm adding the 120 grams of onion to it, and we'll begin sauteing these. After 3 or 4 minutes of the onion softening there, we're not really browning the onion, we're just softening it. Now I'm going to put the meat down on top of it for a minute here. And let this cook for about 3 minutes like this. Then, I'm going to flip the pieces over. Again, so you're not really looking to brown the meat here. It's not like many recipes where you really want that brown crust on there. It's a different sort of recipe. You just want to get the red off of it right now. And we're going to cook it on the other side for a couple minutes here. Yeah, it's been about 3 minutes on that side. I'll flip these pieces back over again. Scrape the onions off that stick to the top. You really don't want those on the meat. Yeah. You can use any sort of mustard you like, but strong mustard is what's called for here. So I'm going to use Russian mustard, which is really strong, and it doesn't have to be too precise in how you lay it out here because it's all going to dissolve together anyway after the long cooking time. But yeah, and try to spread it on the meat some. Okay. Now we have this cocoa powder here. I'm not going to put this on the meat. I'm being very careful to put it around the edges here. And at 275 milliliters of that beer that I showed you earlier, I'm going to put a little bit down first. Then I'm going to put this dough over the top of it, over the top of the meat. It's a little bit of a imprecise operation here because the dough's pretty gloopy, and then the whole thing's going to dissolve together in the end anyway. So you just have to kind of make the best of it. Don't worry about the details too much because it's all, like I said, it's just going to all dissolve into one gloopy mess in the end anyway. So if it's sloppy going in, not a problem. Okay, now the rest of the beer. This is a total of 275 milliliters of that beer. And there we go. Now I'm going to put a lid on this. During this period, you want to see steam just barely leaking out. Probably difficult to see in this camera, but there's little wisps of steam coming out. And here's what it looks like after about 2 hours. Just starting to stick to the bottom, but it's not, there's nothing scorched or anything like that.
I'm very pleased to announce the release of Volume 3, The Focus on Food Chemistry. I want to clear up a few things about these 3 volumes. First, they all contain completely different information. There's no duplication, they're not revisions. When I wrote Volume 1, I had 2.5 years of YouTube videos to cover. People had been asking me for the printed list of ingredients for all of those dishes, and so I obliged. There are recipes with stepwise directions and many tips offered throughout, as well as an extensive history of Russian cuisine over the last 1,000 years, but Volume 1 is very different from Volume 2 and 3. In Volumes 2 and 3, I only had about 9 months of YouTube recipes to cover in each, so I was able to provide stepwise directions for everything. In Volume 2, I included a lot of additional information about cooking and some simple examples of flavor chemistry to set the stage for Volume 3. While Volume 2 hopefully got you thinking about some of the processes that go on in cooking and how flavors are expressed and sensed at the molecular level, the topic was painted with pretty broad strokes to make it easy to digest. Pun intended. Volume 3 is a milestone of the series, in which I have included an entire introductory course in food chemistry, which is why Volume 3 is about 70 pages longer than Volume 2. And if you just want the recipes, that's okay too. You don't have to read the first few chapters, but if you've ever been curious about what influences tastes and flavors and the rationale for deciding cooking times and temperatures and why things taste different when they're combined in different ways, this book will answer many of those questions. It also paves the way for Volume 4, which will be next year. If you want to know more about my adventures as a chef around the world and have some great laughs along the way, be sure to check out the video tour of my book, 40 Years in One Night. It's up on YouTube right now. Click the link. Also look for my cocktail book, Cocktails of the South Pacific and Beyond, Advanced Mixology, available through Amazon online.